I'm used to being down on the floor. I think our mic works better here, so until we get that swapped over, I'll stay up here. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 2, if you want to go ahead and turn there. We're going to primarily focus on two chapters, Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. And then what we'll do is we'll try to pull out relevant sections from Daniel chapter 9 through chapter 12 is the plan for Wednesday night. And then Byron, well, if I'm here next week, which I should be, anyway, what we'll do is we'll do a brief survey of the four main visions in Ezekiel and see how they relate to Revelation. And then Byron's going to take over from there. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this time to be together. We're thankful for your people, your saints, the ones that you've called out of the world and made pure by the blood of the Lamb. We're thankful for all that you do for us, and we're thankful for your kingdom that has overcome the kingdoms and nations of this world, and that will rule and reign forever. We love you, and we're thankful for all that you do for us. In your Son's precious name, amen. All right, so we're basically going to survey some sections of Revelation or of Daniel as they relate to Revelation. And I want to just get our goal out here at the beginning. Byron talked to me about doing a couple of classes on this. Of course, maybe it's because he has so much to work on in Revelation. He's like, hey, do some stuff on Daniel too. But what I want us to understand and what our goal is to see the historical background for Revelation. And if you went through and you put two books side by side, I think you would see it. If you put these two books side by side, you would see the enormous parallels and connections between them. And when we come to Revelation, I think what happens a lot of times is we're lost. We see a beast coming out of the sea. We see lampstands. We see angels. We see a dragon. We see all of these kinds of things. And it's because we're not familiar with the prophets. We're not familiar as well with Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, which are the primary actors for the New Testament. And the most of those, the most important one, is the book of Daniel. And so I want to give a little bit of the historical background. Now, I don't know how it was for you. How many of you were able to go through Daniel? Anybody? If you don't raise your hand, that's okay. Okay, so if you go through and look at Daniel, the length of it, it is actually the only other book that has almost the exact same length as Revelation. Now, we get that all kind of thrown off in our mind, and I'll give you a reason for that. It's because of the chapters. Think about this. What book is longer, Isaiah or Jeremiah? You immediately flip to chapters, don't you? Right? But Jeremiah is longer. Jeremiah is nearly 30 minutes longer, and it's even though it only has 52 chapters. It's because the chapters themselves have differences, okay? If you look at Daniel and you think Revelation, which one's longer? Well, we automatically think Revelation's longer, but they're almost exactly the same, and the reason is because of the chapter divisions. You'll see the parallels in that. And so when you listen to and think through it, these are very similar books in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of connectedness to them, and yet the time frame for these is especially important. Any questions, thoughts? Okay, so remember, Daniel is here kind of in the overlap. Where was Daniel at, and what was happening in Daniel's time? Okay, yeah, he's in Babylon. Okay, and why are they in Babylon? Yeah, they're taken captive because of their idolatry, because of their immorality, all of those kind of things. And if you looked at the state of Israel at the time, you may be wondering, how is God going to make this work? Because the nation's been destroyed. There is no king anymore. The line in many ways has been broken. You have the very last words of 2 Kings is there's one descendant, and he's getting a little bit of favor by the king, and you're kind of like, well, there's a glimmer of hope, but the rest of the nation's gone. And Daniel is here in captivity, and one of the things that he is looking at and is concerned about is what is God doing in the world? How is he going to bring about his kingdom? And until we understand that, it's really hard to kind of see the relevancy of that and how it connects to the rest of it. But if you were at that point, you would understand this is a desperate situation. We need revelation from God to know He's in control, everything is going to happen, His plan is still going to come about, and that there's going to be this ultimate promise to David and the promise to defeat the serpent and all of those kind of ideas. And so Daniel is meant to give that kind of background and that kind of hope. Now, there's a lot of different sections that are in Daniel, and probably the sections that we know the most or know the best are chapter 1, which is where you have the young men and the testing with the food and all of that kind of thing, the training. Chapter 2, which we're going to talk about. Then you've got, what other things do you know from the book of Daniel?
Lion's den.
Okay, the lion's den. Okay, so that's chapter 6. Okay, and what else?
Fiery furnace.
The fiery furnace. Okay, that's chapter 3. And anything else that you know about Daniel? See, the rest of it kind of just becomes kind of fuzzy, doesn't it? We're kind of like, okay, what was chapter 4 and 5? So 4 is where Nebuchadnezzar has pride and becomes an animal in the field. Okay, and he humbles himself, becomes a king again. Chapter 5, we get the expression, the writing on the wall from this story. This is Belshazzar, the night that the Babylonian Empire fell. Okay, 6th chapter is Darius and the whole lion's den. But then it goes to 7, and does it get kind of blurry for you from there? You're just kind of like, what else is in this book? Okay, well, chapter 7 is a parallel to what we'll see here, and then we'll just briefly survey some of the things in the rest of it. And if you want to go back and look at it more, be glad to do that. Okay, so let's begin here in Daniel chapter 2. So Nebuchadnezzar's on the throne. Daniel is one of the various wise men that have been taken captive and are there now in the land. And so let's go ahead and just read this entire chapter. That's what I had planned. And we'll see a lot of similarities to what is happening in the book of Revelation here. So let's begin here in verse 1. And if somebody, let's break this up a little bit. Would someone like to read the first 16 verses? And then we'll pick up, if someone wants to read 17 down through 30. And then if someone wants to read 31 through the end, through 49. So who would like to do the first section? Go ahead.
In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in, and they stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled of the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show me the dream and its interpretation, then you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show him the interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know what you can show me. Tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me the interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king.
All right, who would like to read the next section, 17 through 30? Go ahead.
Then Daniel went to his house and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter, urging them to ask God of heaven for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be killed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. The mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night, and Daniel prayed to God of heaven and declared, "May the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells in him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my fathers, because you have given me wisdom and power, and you now have let me know what we have asked of you, and you have let us know of the king's mystery." Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had assigned to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He came and said to him, "Don't kill the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I will give him the interpretation." Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said to him, "I have found a man among the Judean exiles who can let the king know the interpretation." The king said in his reply to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, "Are you able to tell me the dream and its interpretation?" Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, medium, divine spirit, or astrologer is able to make known to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days. Your dream and the visions that came to you, your mind as you lay in bed, were these. Your Majesty, while you were in your bed, thoughts came to your mind about what will happen in the future. The revealer of the mysteries has let us know what will happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation might be made known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind."
Okay, who would like to read 31 through the end? Go ahead, Ryan.
You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, its breasts and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. After you there will arise another kingdom, inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So, like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom. But it will have in it toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay. They will combine with one another in the seed of men. They will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. The king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present him an offering of fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, Surely your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries. Since you have been able to reveal this mystery, the king promised Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him rule over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made requests of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the king's court.
All right, thank you. Thank you for those who read. All right, so if there's any part of Daniel that we're at least going to discuss today, you're likely familiar with this. I'm not going to assume that everybody has. You may have never read Daniel, may not know much about this, but this is a pretty familiar section, and maybe it's just because it's pretty early on and we know some of the other, it's one of the kind of easiest to grasp of what's actually happening in the book of Daniel. Now, one of the things I want you to see in this, or actually I'm curious if you saw it, what words stood out to you as you went through this? What are some words that stood out to you? Mysteries? Okay, yeah. Okay, by the way, the word mystery is going to be used in Revelation. Okay. All right, what else?
Kingdoms.
Okay, kingdoms. All right. Last days. Good. Reveal. What else? How about interpretation? Okay. All right, so there's a misconception just out there in general. When you think about Revelation or you think about an apocalypse, if I use the word apocalypse, what comes to your mind? End of the world. Immediately, all the time, we think end of the world. Okay? But do you know what the word apocalypse means? It means revelation. It means to reveal something. Now, in a sense, is it connected with the end of the world? Yes, because there's going to be a great revealing. That's what they're talking about. So an individual revealing is tied into the greater revealing, okay? But when you're thinking about the concept of revelation, how many times have you gone through and heard apocalyptic literature is meant to hide the message from somebody? You ever heard that? I heard that. That was at least the impression I came away from with Revelation, is that the reason it was written like that was so that it would actually hide it from the Romans, and yet the Christians could understand it. That's not what it was about, guys. That's not what it was about. It's apocalypse. It's meant to reveal something that had been hidden. So think about what's happening here in Daniel chapter 2. Is God trying to hide anything? What's he hiding here? He's not hiding anything. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He is revealing it, okay? And so when you look at Daniel chapter 2, verses 28 and 30 here, where he talks about he's a revealer who reveals mysteries. The mystery is revealed to me. You see it down in verses 45 down through 47. Same idea. He is a revealer of mysteries, for you've been able to reveal this mystery. Now, there's a lot of words that should jump out to us in this section, but the first word is the word revealed, okay? You want to know what that word is? It's apocalypto. That's the word. And so it's used 5 times in this chapter. And it's a clear connection between Revelation. It connects to it. And so the Greek word, when you come to the book of Revelation, the name of it is apocalypsis. In fact, if you go through, Austin would know this. I don't know if you have much familiarity with Spanish. You know what they call the book of Revelation? It's apocalypsis. It's because it's going back to the actual word. It's not about hiding it at all. And in fact, the reason it's translated, the reason it's called Revelation in your Bible, is because that's what it's doing. It's revealing something, okay? So that's really, really important all the way through this. Again, it's so rampantly abused in our context, but whenever it was used in apocalyptic literature, it is God revealing something that is happening in heaven or his plan that he is orchestrating in the world. And so John's goal is not to hide anything, just like here with Daniel. Okay, now there's a lot of other connected words. You'll have things like what will take place, what is signified, things that are quickly, last days, like all of those type of words are used here in the same context. All right, so when we come away from that concept, what we should see is, first off, that God is a God who reveals mysteries and controls time. Did you notice right there in the middle what was the main thing? Like as soon as Daniel got the revelation, he said something. Look here at verses 20 down through 23. What was the reaction that Daniel had? What did he understand?
God reveals deep and secret things.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. And so the book of Daniel, there's a lot of things that Daniel is about, but how many times have you thought that the book of Daniel was about how God's people live in exile? You ever heard that? It's definitely part of it. But you want to know what the primary point of Daniel is about? Daniel is showing that God is supreme. He is over everything, and that he is sovereign. And it doesn't matter if you're Nebuchadnezzar and you've got the kingdom of Babylon, or if you're the Persians, or the Greeks, or the Romans, or any nation of the world, you are nothing compared to God. This is his story. It's not your story. That's what Daniel is about. And it's the same thing that gets carried over to the book of Revelation. Okay, so that's the main idea here, is talking about how great God is. And that's the kind of the point that Daniel's trying to get across, and that is made throughout the book. Now, we have this is the vision. So let's talk a little bit about that. So the dream is a statue of various kinds, and you've probably seen these. But he explains, and this is really clear with apocalyptic literature. You'll have a dream, and then what will happen is he immediately turns around and explains it. And doesn't that sound like the exact opposite of how a lot of people, look at Revelation and apocalyptic literature? And yet that's what apocalyptic literature has done. It gives you a picture, so you have an image in your mind, and then it turns around and tells you what the image was all about. That's what happened here. Do you see that? Everybody with me so far? Have I blown your brains? I mean, it's what is it, 9:30 in the morning? You probably weren't expecting all of that this morning. But that's what's happening in the book of Daniel, and it's very important. So he goes through and he looks at this statue, and he doesn't have a clue about it. And then what does Daniel do? He turns around and says, okay, boom, 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 boom. He explains it to him. And this is exactly how Revelation works a lot. So there's 4 kingdoms that arise out of this, and these are the 4 different kingdoms that he refers to. And now, he's not talking about necessarily worldwide emperors, even though that's true. These are big nations that have a direct impact on God's story and the people he's using. Okay? What about the people in China? What about the people over in Russia? What about the people in the United States? They're not relevant because they're not connected to his people. And his people are the main mechanism he's working through. Okay? So, when you look here, you have Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome is not specifically identified in the book. Later, it will be picked up with the ships of Kittim, later in chapter 11. And why do you think that Rome isn't mentioned by name? Any suggestions? Does anybody know what Rome was like at the point when Daniel was writing it? It was tiny. It was just a little small city-state. Like, it was nothing. I mean, if Daniel would even refer to it, they might have known it, but it would have been just kind of like some faraway, small, irrelevant empire. However, they would have known about these. They would have known about Babylon. They would have known about the Medes and the Persians, and they would have known about Greece. And so that's the reason that it's not specifically referred to as you come forward. Now, he gives the meaning, though. See, there's this statue, but what happens to the statue?
Broken.
Okay, how is it broken?
Stone fell. It was cut without hands.
Oh,
Crushed it.
Yeah, okay. And so we look at that and we're like, what in the world? A stone cut without hands. What does that mean? Well, what does it mean? What did Daniel say it meant?
Everlasting kingdom.
Yeah, an everlasting kingdom. And who's going to set it up?
God of heaven.
Yeah, the God of heaven. Now, how might that be manifested in the actual vision? Can you cut a rock out without your hands? I can't do that. You can't do that, especially at that time. There was no way. And if you want to just show an image of God orchestrating something, here you go. He cuts a rock out without hands. That's to show the invisible hand of God orchestrating these events. Okay, so that's how apocalyptic literature works a little bit. And so in Daniel chapter 2, this is what he's describing. And you have initially, you may look at the 10 toes. A lot of people today, they get all kind of crazy on the 10 toes. That's 10 different kingdoms that came later. I'll tell you what that is. Rome initially was a pure area, okay? It came from a line of people. Do you know eventually how Rome was organized later? It was arranged in 10, provinces, basically, with lesser kings. The 10 horns that become later in Revelation that he mentions, you have the 7 heads on the beast and the 10 horns. I'm assuming you've read Revelation, and we've already read it, but I'm referring to things. That's your 10 horns, guys. And that's the 10 toes. That's how they ruled. And so anyway, that just shows the kind of the change of how the kingdom itself was going to operate. Okay, now, everybody familiar with this? Questions, comments, thoughts? Is that clear as mud? Go ahead.
Even Jesus, when he says, thank God for revealed this, not to the wise, but to the children of faith, when he's using the same word the whole time. He's often saying, revealing things about the kingdom, and he's using the same language.
Yeah. Yeah, every time. And that's where, for us, we've got to just get all of the Hollywood movies out of your head. Get, 20, anyway, all of the different movies, just get them out of your head and let the Bible define its words, okay? It's Revelation over and over and over again. Other question? Go ahead.
In Galatians 2, it talks about a circumcision not with hands, and we understand that that's a spiritual circumcision. And so the implication here, made without hands, maybe also that it is a spiritual kingdom and not an earthly kingdom like the others.
Yeah. So it's going to completely operate differently, different set of values, and yet it's also it's controlled, brought about by God. That's a great parallel. Other thoughts, questions, things you want to add? Go ahead.
I think what you're getting at is really important because we come to a lot of this kind of literature in the Old Testament as well as Revelation, and the idea that's kind of joked about and commonplace is that this is for Bible scholars and preachers and things like that to understand, and me as a lay Christian am not really supposed to understand this. And I think that's just really against the whole spirit of Scripture and Revelation, and that we can't use excuses like that to not study this stuff and understand it.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. It's like people do the antithesis of what Revelations say. Because they're like, hey, the normal Christian can't read and understand the Bible. And what does the Revelation say do? Read it and you'll get a blessing out of it, okay? They say, oh, this is too complicated, you'll never understand it, God's hiding some things from you. And what is the meaning of the word? God's revealing things to you, okay? So you need to believe in yourself and to realize you can pick up this book and you may not understand every single thing. And not every single thing always has tons and tons of significance, okay? But it's to draw an image or a picture in your mind. And there's a lot of different reasons why you have the gold and silver and bronze, and we could go into some of that if you have more questions about that. But I just want us to see what's actually happening here. It's to give us a picture, a snapshot, so that we can identify and appreciate and understand. Okay, let's go ahead and now move to chapter 7. I know we're jumping over, but this is a parallel. And you might not have known that it was a parallel, but it definitely is. And what I want us to do again is I want us just to read it. It's not going to take us too long, but let's read chapter 7. Who would like to read for us here verses 1 through 11, or I'm sorry, 1 through 12, and then verses 13 down through 28? Go ahead.
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds were stirring up the great sea, and 4 beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear, it was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. And his clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. And his throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire, and a stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. And I looked then, because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time.
Okay, who'd like to read the rest? Go ahead.
I continued watching in the night visions, and I saw the one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. He was given authority to rule and glory and a kingdom, so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was deeply distressed within me, and the visions in my mind terrified me. I approached one of those who were standing by and asked him the true meaning of all this, so he would let me know the interpretation of these things. These huge beasts, 4 in number, are 4 kings who will rise from the earth. But the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom it possesses and possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to know the true meaning of the 4th beast, the one different from all the others, extremely terrifying, with iron teeth and bronze claws, devouring, crushing, and trampling it with its feet, whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head, and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that was more visible than the others. As I was watching, this horn waged war against the holy ones, and was prevailing over them until the Ancient of Days arrived, and a judgment was given in favor of the holy ones of the Most High. For the time had come, and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. This is what he said: the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, and crush it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. Another different from the previous ones will rise after them and subdue 3 kings. He He will speak words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will intend to change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will convene, and his dominion will be taken away to be completely destroyed forever. The kingdom, dominion, and greatness of the kingdoms under all of heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will serve and obey him. This is the end of the interpretation. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts terrified me greatly, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself.
I always love Daniel's reaction, because if we had those kind of same dreams, that's probably how we would react. We're like, what in the world was that? And yet you notice in this context, what is Daniel doing? He sees the vision, and what's the immediate question he has? What does it mean? And that's just what we do. Okay, we do the same thing, and then is Daniel just left in the dark to not know anything about it? No, he's told. It's revealed. Okay, that's the same kind of concept. Now, we may look at this and we may say, okay, I don't know everything here, but let's just boil it down. What is the one thing that happens in this? What has been revealed that is really important for Daniel when he's suffering and in captivity in Babylon? What's been revealed in chapter 7 that's so important for him?
God is higher than all kingdoms.
Yeah. And who's going to possess the kingdom?
Those who follow.
The saints. Okay, boom, there's the message. It's been revealed. You may not know every single nook and cranny of it, but the primary message has been revealed. Okay, and that's super, super important to understand. And so when you look at Daniel chapter 7, again, this is illustrating how apocalyptic literature works. And you'll notice there's a lot of similarities here between what actually happens in chapter 2 and also in chapter 7. There's a lot of similarities to Revelation. For example, you have a great sea. You've got beasts that come up out of the sea. And we look at that and we're like, what in the world? But he's talking about the tumultuous nations and kingdoms that come out of that. And when you look at what he's describing here, these are the 4 beasts that he goes on to in detail. These aren't my original slides. These are things I just found online. But here's the different ones. And we look at those and we're wondering, what's going on here? And yet, if you go into the first one, this is talking about Nebuchadnezzar and the picture of a lion. By the way, if you look, this would have been really obvious. They had lions all over their culture. It was a really common concept. And you look at what happens to the lion. He has eagle's wings. His wings are plucked. He's lifted up from the earth. And then a man's heart is given. What does that sound like that we've read already, if we've read the book of Daniel? It sounds like what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Here's a person that actually learned the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men, and then it becomes obvious. He's just a man. He's not the Ancient of Days. Okay? Then you've got here the second one. It's raised up on one side. We look at that and we're like, what is going on here? And this is the Medes and the Persians, and one part of the empire was stronger than the other. That's this lifting up. And the 3 bones are likely the 3 nations they devoured before. There's a lot of argument about that. But again, that's not really critical to what's happening here. Then you've got a leopard, which is already fast, and 4 wings. And the picture is of something rapid. And that's the Greek Empire. How quickly did the Greek Empire spread? You remember it was Alexander. Okay, he came to the throne at about 20 years old. He died at 33, and by that point, he had conquered the known world. Like that. Pretty good picture, pretty good description. A leopard for its speed, here's the wings, and the 4 heads are going to be the way that it was broken down. When he died, it was broken into 4 different sections. Okay? And then you have the Roman Empire. We talked a little bit about that in some detail here. Now, when you look at what's happening with these various beasts, you now have a bit of contrast that happens. And this is in 9 and 10. And again, this is a bit confusing unless you have read the Old Testament stories so far. But this is a window into what is talked about as the divine council. This is what's happening in heaven. This is God's kind of, council. How would you describe that? It's kind of like mission control, sort of. It's where you have a team that is going through and making decisions here. And yet this is familiar to us. What's another book that sounds a lot like this? Sounds a lot like this description. Okay, Ezekiel. What else?
Job.
Yeah, Job. Remember what happens? Satan comes in, and here's God on his throne, and here's all of his servants before him. You'll see it also in Revelation. All he's talking about, I say all he's talking about, but he's talking about the divine council. It's talked about in Psalm 82. It's talked about in Job 1. It's talked about here in Daniel 7. It's in other places as well. Now, who do you think is the Ancient of Days? Yeah, that's the Father. Okay, that's pretty simple. And here's a picture of a judgment scene. Again, these are images that you would know just from our culture and even from their culture. And so you have the Ancient of Days, and what happens? What does he do in verses 11 and 12 to this last beast that he's describing?
So cool, you get this long description of all these beasts, and he's dead.
Yeah.
2 words.
Again, what's the point of Daniel? To show the supremacy and sovereignty of God. Okay, here's a nation that's crushing everything, and he just goes like that. Whoosh, it's gone. That's an incredible thing. Now, in 13 and 14, we have one that is coming to the Ancient of Days on the clouds of heaven. What is he described as? Okay, Son of Man. Now, what does Son of Man mean?
A person.
Yeah, it's a person. It's a human one. It's a descendant of Adam. That's all he's saying. It is a human being that comes up to the Ancient of Days. Okay? And what happens in verse 14?
He's given all authority.
Yeah, he's given the kingdom. Now, there's a lot of things that really should be kind of ringing in our ears here. Does any of this sound like Genesis chapter 1? What was the original plan of God with man? Yeah, to rule, to fill the earth, to have dominion, okay? And so that's what God has been wanting, but has God ever agreed and had a partner that he could work with? No, the very first one's messed it up. And it's been the same thing all the way throughout human history. But now here's one that can come and rule alongside God. And we look at this and we think Son of Man because who do we often think of as the Son of Man? What person?
The Messiah, Jesus.
Yeah, the Messiah, Jesus. And it is the most frequent title that he used for himself. This is why. Because in this time where people are wondering about this kingdom, they've been in captivity, the nation's been restored, they pored over the book of Daniel, trying to understand the times. They knew what Daniel was talking about, and they're looking for this person. And so he's given kingdom and dominion. And I just want to say this to those that, have you ever heard people say that when Jesus is going to come back to this earth, he's going to receive his kingdom? You ever heard that? It's the premillennial concept. Look at what happens here in Daniel 7. When does the Son of Man receive his kingdom?
When he's raised.
Yeah, when he's raised, when he comes to the Ancient of Days. He is ruling and reigning right now. And the reason that that's so important is because think about, that's what's picked up there in Revelation 4 and 5. That's what we've seen. He came, and they're wondering who's able to open the seals. They're wondering, what's going to happen here? And here's the Son of Man that is able to rule and to reign. All right, and then we have this last kingdom. And so this started when Jesus ascended, and then it's further explanation of this other kingdom. So what do we have then? Here's what we have. You see the parallels? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And yet now we have more information here about this last beast. Now, when you look at the last part of this chapter, Daniel's distressed and he's alarmed and he's asking for some explanation. And so he gets some explanation here. What is the fourth beast going to do to the saints? Yeah, he's going to persecute him, going to try to destroy them. And yet, ultimately, when you look at verse 21, the horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until what? The Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. The idea is not just one person receives the kingdom, but ultimately all of them receive the kingdom. Now, I'm going to leave the rest of this explanation about the horns and all of that until we get to the book of Daniel. But I want us to just think about, again, this is what the New Testament is saying has happened. This is the kingdom that has come. This is the ascension of Jesus. This is his death, his victory. This is what the background is for what's going to happen there in the book of Revelation. Okay, questions, comments, thoughts? Is that helpful? Go ahead.
I just point out in verse 9, when the Ancient of Days takes a seat, the thrones is plural. The thrones were set in place. You might wonder, how come there's more than one? Well, in Revelation, everything gets kind of jumbled together, but Jesus is the one referred to with the whiteness of hair, fire, and stuff. So put those up together to figure things out.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole lot that we're going to talk about more. We'll have some more detail here. But the reason that this is so important, again, is as you come to the first century, they're anticipating the kingdom is about to come. They're looking for this time period. They're wondering. They've already seen the rest of them. They've seen Babylon. They've seen the Persians. They've seen Greek. And they know the Romans are ruling now. And so they're wondering, okay, when's the kingdom coming? What's about to happen? Okay, and so there's not a lot said about Rome here. But what Revelation is going to do is going to pick up this fourth beast and give more detail about it. Explain it. Show how it relates to the specific time that they are in there in the first century. Okay, hopefully that was as clear as mud and you got a lot out of that. If you have other questions, I'd be glad to sit down and talk with you. We're going to look at 9 through 12 next time, some snippets of that. And if you have questions or something, feel free to ask them, and we'll go from there. Thank you all for your good attention and participation.